webinar is really building on the discussions that we had from the first webinar, which introduced a very broad review of different financial mechanisms that could be used at local level to support FLR activities, which range from asset investments, enabling investments, from private sector investors, for example, impact investments, insurance, and grants, public programs providing finance through regulatory work or through grants and small-scale programs, and also civil society initiatives and how they can provide different types of finance and how this finance also reaches the ground and what it actually means for smallholders and stakeholders on the ground, what incentives does this finance provide for them to implement FLR activities to restore the landscape and improve their productivity. So the key messages that came out from the overview, this review of local finance mechanisms in the previous webinar, were that these financial mechanisms to support local implementation were very highly contextual dependent. What worked in one landscape or for one restoration activity in one location may not work in another, but that different mechanisms can be used at different stages of the FLR process, and also for different types of stakeholders and different types of landscapes, depending on the need. Aligning these investments with other investments in the landscape, creating this sort of blended finance, these combinations can help generate much larger impact across the landscape to upscale these activities, to support the FLR process, to provide much wider ecosystem benefits that go beyond maybe the focal landscape that FLR is being implemented in. And how this, in looking at aligning with other investments in the landscape, this can contribute to multiple elements of landscape sustainability, so not just financial returns. And these financial mechanisms may not just be providing finance themselves, it may also be providing training, for example, or asset development and provision. And that there's also, because of the FLR process, is not just a spatial element, there are temporal elements in this. So we also need to take into account how these different activities are interacting across a spatial landscape, and how, and over time as well, what financial mechanism may be needed at the start of the FLR process may be quite different to those at the end, and how any offsite impacts in the landscape and financial decisions and investment design can also impact how FLR is implemented at local scale, but also what types of finance are needed. So these are the key messages that came out from the first webinar, and what a lot of the participants were really asking as well was how we wanted to see this in practice and case studies. What can we learn from these different case studies? So during this webinar, we will present, well, 3 speakers will be presenting examples of how their different financial mechanisms have been used to support restoration activities on the ground, conservation and improved production, and more sustainable production at local level. We have Jodie Smith, who will be speaking from the Earth Care Agency in Fiji, Donal Yang, who is a national red specialist from the Wildlife Conservation Society in Cambodia, and Tomonobu Kumahira from Komaza, in Kenya. So we are, I believe, going through time zones in terms of who will start. So I'm going to hand the floor over to Jodie Smith, who will introduce herself and her organisation before she gets started on her presentation. So over to you, Jodie.
Hi, sorry, I just realized that I was muted. So I think you missed my introduction. So I was just saying, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone here. My name's Jodie Smith. I'm dialing in from Fiji. I run a company here called the Earth Care Agency, and the Earth Care Agency is dedicated to supporting community businesses with incubation, and we have worked almost exclusively in agriculture, but we're now branching out, and we're working with other sectors. I have people in the room with me who are sitting in and watching, so I'll just go straight into my presentation. Right, let me just start the slideshow. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of background on us. So the Earth Care Agency is two of us, myself and Callum Drummond. I came to Fiji 7 years ago. I'm actually descended from the first Chinese man in Fiji who came here in the 1860s. He left China during the Opium War, went to the gold rush in Australia, feared for his life as many of the Chinese did, so he stole a boat and he sailed it to Fiji, and he founded the first Chinese family. So my family have been here for 6 generations, but I personally moved here 7 years ago. Callum Drummond came here about 7 years ago as well. He first came out as a volunteer, and he was working on the island doing sports education on Batiki Island, and he helped found what is now one of Fiji's leading community-owned businesses, Bula Batiki. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. So we have 2 divisions to the business, TECA Community and TECA Investment, and this is a recent division. We used to be very community focused, and now we are also investment focused. I think we have somebody here who I can hear in the background. Maybe if you could just go to mute, that would be great. Thanks. So I'll talk about TECA Community first, because this is how we started. So what we do is we work very closely with village communities, and we're really working to empower those communities to have the right knowledge around things like business compliance, working with regulation, so that they might be able to create products and get those to local and export markets. So an example of what some of our projects look like. Oh no, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. So TECA Community, if you see the graph on the left, these are the stages of businesses that we work with across TECA. So TECA Community incubates early stage and startup businesses, and then TECA Investment, which I'll talk about soon, is going to be looking after more mature businesses with some support from partners internationally. So TECA Community, as I've mentioned, supports and incubates Fijian green and blue village or community-owned startups. So we really tailor to the needs of the villages, and we make sure that there is a clear path to market. So we help identify business opportunities, and we connect those businesses to the markets. And then our core objectives when we work with the communities is that we help them create legal entities. That's something that's really missing on the ground here. We also will help them with bespoke training and implementing different systems. So for example, if they're producing a food product, we'll help them with organic certification, food safety certification. And then we also do things like branding, marketing, R&D, production of retail products. We also have non-business objectives, which we try wherever we can to bring into our projects. So food security is quite a big one. So we have a big problem in Fiji with non-communicable diseases, mostly due to products being introduced to the diet like sugar, flour, noodles, rice, that type of thing. So we sort of try to support the communities to go back to the staple foods that they grow. We also work very closely on soil health and crop biodiversity. That is brought into all of our projects. And then we try where we can to do early childhood, childhood education, and supporting schools to grow and to cook. And also a key thing is inspiring young people to want to get into agriculture. Fiji, like many developing countries I've worked in, you become a farmer because that was the last thing that was available to you. So we're really trying to change that mentality. Our projects are usually 2 to 4 weeks long, so we'll go in with a team, sometimes with volunteers and sometimes just us. And once those projects are delivered, then beyond that, we actually incubate the businesses. It doesn't work just to go in and set it up. We have to look after these businesses for some time. So Bulabatiki, for example, we've been incubating them now for about 3 years. Next slide. So just an example of what some of our community projects look like. So Nosolo Village, they are a very remote village who have wild turmeric, and there is an American buyer who's very keen to buy it because the curcumin levels are very high. So we will be assisting the village setting up a community cooperative. We will help them with their USDA NOP certification, and we will also help them transition from wild harvest to a sustainable cropped system. Numbila Village, so I'm really excited about this because I'm learning to surf. Numbila Village is the traditional landowner of Fiji's premier surf resort, and they have the fishing rights over the Cloudbreak Reef, which, for those of you who know surfing, it's Kelly Slater's favourite reef break in the world. So we are going to work with Numbila, who are on a very dry side of the island, and we are going to be setting up an agroforestry design and doing a vegetable supply for them to supply Tavarua Island Resort. We'll also be bringing in a seafood fish sustainability component as well. Bulabatiki, so we've been working with them for a long time now. So they are the first island in the Pacific that we know of who have full NOP and EU organic certification. The only other islands in Fiji who have that are owned by Jim Jannard of Oakley Sunglasses and Mel Gibson. So there's a huge amount of pride that the island has achieved that, and also that they're making this very high-end retail product which they're exporting to the UK. And the great thing about this project is that they are creating this product in their community hall. So the community hall is also being used for church services and things like that, yet they can turn this into a facility which is producing a really high-end product. So they've really become a model for the country, and really the confidence that comes through creating this is really, really important in a place like Fiji. So next, I'll just run over this one very quickly. Some of you may have come across precious plastics. So this is a open source upcycling project around the world now. Fiji has just started one, and we are working with this group. They're mostly students and musicians. And they will be upcycling products that are collected from the ocean, and they will be turning them into very high-end retail products, including surfboard fins. This one is one of my personal favorites. So that gets spent and often wasted with multiple projects, government, corporate, NGO going on at the same time, but without the different projects having awareness of each other. So we'll be working with one province in Fiji to set up a blockchain-based reporting system so that everybody can be aware of what everybody's doing. And then people who optionally want to report on what they're spending can also do that. So then now I come into TECA Investment, and TECA Investment is going to be a fund management partner for a fund that's being set up as part of the Great Sea Reef program here in Fiji. So the Great Sea Reef program is a WWF Pacific driven program. It's multi-stakeholder, so we have corporate, government, NGO, all involved in this, and the aim is to conserve, regenerate, and make our Great Sea Reef the most as resilient as we can. The Great Sea Reef is the third largest barrier reef in the world, and without it we would have very little fish, and we would also have no tourism industry. So TECA Investment is one of 4 partners in what's called the Matanataki Fiji Investment Partnership. The lab is another partner. And this will be a private investment fund set up to invest into green and blue businesses with a very clear focus on the health of the ocean and the reef. So Matanataki grew out of the fact that there's a growing supply of capital for sustainable ocean investments. So it's going to be this partnership which channels international investments into sustainable businesses here in Fiji. And the investments can be land-based or they can be offshore, but they have to have direct impact on the ocean and reef health. So what's the macro concept for us? So I think those of you who work in developing countries who are facing climate change, I think a lot of this will be familiar to you. So Fiji is a very small country. We don't really even have a butterfly effect here, but we are very definitely part of a globalized world. So we really need to focus on providing meaningful incomes for the people of the country, and we need to produce goods and services that are desired and competitive internationally, but these things cannot destroy our ecosystems. In fact, they need to support the resilience of our ecosystems. So Matanataki is really built on that vision. So the, sorry, I have some notes here I'm actually going to elaborate on. Yeah, the key thing for the Great Sea Reef, right now our economy is really supported and hugely by our tourism sector. Tourism's 40% of our GDP. So without this reef, we wouldn't have our beautiful white beaches, for example. So to be supporting this reef is key to the country, and for people in the country to have incomes that actually empower them to do the right thing is also really, really important. We have a lot of industries here which have been around for 160 years. Sugarcane, for example, is one of our biggest employers. I think we have 200,000 people indirectly in the country connected to sugarcane, and that's almost a quarter of our population. So to be able to find alternatives, it's a very big task, but this is one of the things that Matanataki is looking to do as a much broader vision. So the investments, they really need to be functional, they need to be systematic, they need to have conditions on them, and we really want the investments to bring about changes in long-standing behaviours in key industries, particularly in agriculture, forestry and fisheries. So we have a lot of problem with chemical use in agriculture. We have a lot of problem with cutting down of forests. We have a lot of problems with overfishing. So the investments really will be geared to change that. We also want to look at how, through Matanataki, can we support Fijian industry and job creation, where we're going to decrease imports and also look at new future-proof exports. So what businesses can be supported to bring about, to bring in income really that will change the way ordinary people go about their daily lives, and how they farm and how they fish and how they care for the forest. So I'm going to just jump forward now, because I know I'm running out of time. Our business sectors, so we are looking at 6 thematic sectors, and this is very much in line with the goals of WWF's Great Sea Reef program. So we have organic agriculture, ecosystem services, sustainable seafood, ecotourism, blue infrastructure, and sustainable energy. And we will begin by focusing on sustainable seafoods and blue infrastructure, and also some waste projects. Okay, so what are the impact objectives that we have? So our impact objectives are really driven by the Great Sea Reef program and also by the key partners who will be the investors. So for example, we are looking for businesses who are going to support mangrove protection and replanting. We're also wanting job creation in underserved coastal communities. Ecosystem management, which includes improving stock status of key species and rehabilitating those. Also providing protein for the country locally. The Great Sea Reef has a very ambitious target of 50% of the Great Sea Reef catchment, that's 4 out of our 14 provinces, transition to organic agricultural production. Sorry, I've missed that out there. It's possible, but it's only possible with the right businesses to be buying those products. And also energy creation. There are so many businesses I speak to here who say, yes, we would go into plant-based packaging or we would recycle, but we can't afford the energy. So we're looking at a potential energy project to supply that using abundant renewable sources like geothermal or tidal. So what do you need to do to be eligible? You need to be green and blue with clear focus on having solutions within your business for sustainable, making things more sustainable. So you need to be thematically aligned with the impact objectives I've just gone through. We will cover every stage from a great concept on a napkin with some people behind it who've got proven track record, all the way through to mature businesses. There aren't that many mature businesses here. We're mostly going to be looking in the early and startup, early mature, early acceleration phase. And you can be foreign if you have clear local capacity here. But we are looking for local businesses predominantly. So the different services that Mātānataki will provide, so not only will we be fund management, but we will also be providing early acceleration and incubation services. That is a real need, and it's a need in most of the developing countries that I work in. So I work a lot between West Africa and here. So business catalyzation, access to market, collaboration, learning, business development for startups, investment readiness, and then the access to finance. And we will also have an impact assessment framework. And again, at mature stage, investment readiness, access to finance, and again, that impact assessment framework. And yeah, so this really just covers what I've said already. Catalyzation, access to finance, impact assessment, measurement. That's going to be provided by some of our investor partners. They've got really great tools in place for impact assessment and measurement. Market linkage we will also do. And the timeline. So we've started now. Mātānataki is officially launched. We're in the process now of getting 3 blue businesses ready for investment. We've presented these to our first investor. The rest of this year, we're going to be raising more funds. We're hoping for this fund to be around about €50 million. This will be one of the first of its kind in Fiji. Up until now, there's only been 2 other funds in the country. There's been one that was worth €10 million, and that was for entrepreneurship only. There was no sustainability aspect to it. There is also another local fund which is with local investors, but again, this is just about financial return. There's no sustainability aspect. Moving into 2020, we want to develop 15 to 20 green and blue businesses and have them ready by mid-2020. And then in the end of 2020, we will be looking to scale up what we are doing. So who are the partners in this? So I am here. This is me. I am the coalface. I'm the one running around talking to everybody, looking at how government, private sector, communities, how they can all walk together and create something meaningful, something different that's going to work on the ground. Then we have WWF, who we are doing this very much in alignment with their Great Sea Reef program. Landscape Finance Lab. I said to Paul Chatterton recently, Paul has created this amazing playground and he's invited us to come and play in it. And that's really how I see this. He's put together a concept and a great team of people together to make this happen. So Paul, if you are listening in, we're so very grateful for this. It's really amazing. There's nothing like it in the Pacific, and probably nothing like it in most places. Ikigai. This is Anton, who is in Vienna, and he is an amazing financial brain. He's doing the investor coordination, all the financial structuring. And then Innovent. So Peter is from Vienna as well, and Innovent is based, I believe, between Nepal, and they have quite a large office in India. So they've specialized for the last 10 years in business development, business modeling, and catalyzation. And they will be supporting us on the ground with incubating businesses. And that's us. And then I'm sure my time is probably up. Sorry, I'm not timing myself here. So just a sample of the sorts of projects we're looking at. So we eventually, this is very big picture, we will be looking for renewable energy infrastructure, probably inviting an overseas partner to come here and set something up. There's several plastic circular economy projects. One of the plastic ones I mentioned earlier, that's a community business. We're looking at some new ideas, and this is the future-proofing concept. What can this country create so that we can really, earn proper export revenue through things that really are going to serve the world. So algae farming for biodiesel and also for food supplements is key. Another great thing with algae farming is that when you have chemical nutrient runoff into the oceans, the algae farms can actually suck all of that up, so your chemicals don't get to the reef. Waste management is very, very key, big problem, not just here, but in many, many developing countries. And then, of course, ecotourism. And that's me. I'm done. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jodie, for that overview of the work that you're doing with the Earth Care Agency. I think it's very interesting to see how these different funds have been developed to address the many issues that are being faced within Fiji, and particularly from the reef or the Great Sea reef approach, right from within the island all the way down to the fisheries. One thing I did, let me just my time frame at the end to hold those discussions, and also Disha Chandra from the Landscape Finance Lab, she is going to be the tech support. So if you are having any questions, any issues regarding to being able to type a question or hear anything or not being able to see anything, do let her know. And also one final thing I forgot to mention as well, the LinkedIn group Landscape Finance in Action is also being launched alongside this webinar, so that questions can be continued after the webinar, and hopefully we can share lessons learned between those who maybe have similar case studies to those that are presented, or maybe new questions of how these types of finance may be useful for your own projects, or going forward, if you have a very interesting case study that you'd like to share, then do let us know through that. I will, either myself or Disha will be giving you information of how to access that LinkedIn group as well before the end of this webinar. So if there are any clarification questions, do let me know. I can't see any at the moment. With the communities, once you have identified the potential to upscale their value chains, are you creating supporting them, or is there training for them to create business models so that they can access these larger funds that you're looking to finance?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's Tomo's first slide where he said that smallholder farmers are the future of Africa. I mean, that is very much the same here and in every developing country I've worked in. The farmers here, then they often don't have the literacy. There's also definitely in the last 30 years here, they have not been supported to form themselves into cooperatives. A lot of the issue for the farmers and why they're not able to get goods to market is because there's no aggregation of product, and because there's very little sort of business capacity. So yes, in TECA, that's really what we've been specializing in. We set up models, so it'll be, this is a model for a community business with 10 people or 300 people. This is the type of entity you want to set up. This is what you need to do to register your business, to get your different licenses. Then these are the compliances that you need. So yeah, we very much set up those models and give that support. Did I answer all of your question there?
Yes, I think so. And I think that's a good link. A good link as well to Tomo's presentation to see if we have resolved the technical issues we were having. Disha, have we had any luck with Tomo's presentation?
We've got Tomo back on the call, so we can give it a try now.
Perfect. Tomo, let's try second time's the charm, I believe. Please do start your presentation if you can.
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me well this time? Hope this time it works.
That's much, much clearer. Thank you.
Great. So let me also then try to project the screen. I just so you know, I shared with you the slides themselves so that you can see it. But let me try this time.
Great, we can see your screen. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can you also hear me well?
You're a bit low, but we can actually hear you. So if you could maybe speak.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, stop me.
Great. And also we see your presenter view. So if you wanted to put it in.
Oh, that's an interesting.
A share mode.
Oh, I see. Let me. So you're looking at the presenter view right now.
Yeah.
Maybe this works better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So thank you very much for the patience. My name is Tomo. I'm working at Komaza. Komaza is a smallholder forestry company which deals with thousands of smallholder farmers living in the most vulnerable climate conditions across coastal Kenya. And we plant millions of trees every year so that we can create sustainable income source for farmers, but also to make a sustainable forestry business in Africa, which is also another pressing need given the fast-growing economies and middle classes. And I'd like to touch on 2 points mainly today. The first is to give an overview of Komaza and what we are doing. And the second part is how we finance our activities and especially the growth it takes when we are launching a large-scale forestry production line. So I'm looking forward to hear more questions. So please let me know what are the questions you have through chat. So just to start off, why we are doing this, it's really clear. We have a massive deforestation, 3 million hectares of forest loss every year across Africa only, which is about the size of Rwanda alone. So we're losing Rwanda-like forests every year. And although we lose forests for various reasons, first one is about the fact that about 90% of the wood that are harvested are used to be burned for energy sources. And that trend will continue as population grows and economy grows. And that is resulting in $30 billion wood deficit projected by PwC by 2030. So this is quite devastating. We are losing a lot of forest every year, and we are having increasing demand in the area. and the conventional plantations that are supplying most of the developed market wood use, that's growing only 2%, and it's only enough to supply for 10% of wood consumption in Africa. And even though we are trying to build a lot of new forestation projects, community relationship is a challenge, land acquisition is a challenge, it's hard to buy and register for land legally. And finally, forestry is a really heavy financing project. So you need to have a good financing, which is really hard in general to get in Africa. And we believe farmers are actually the solution for this problem. People think, just like when microfinancing started, it is wrong idea to work with smallholder farmers because they have small land, they can't manage a lot of trees, and all sorts of the reasons. But we built over time a way to make this model work by building a sustainable business model as well as really rigorous operational model. The partnership structure works like this. It's an exchange of free value between Komaza and smallholder farmers. Komaza will provide seedlings and inputs and technical expertise, training, and everything that is needed to make a successful forestry project. In return, farmers will get their land and labor and security for the trees available for Komaza so that we can run a successful forestry project. So from a farmer's perspective, this is a really attractive way to make an upside because they do not have to invest anything other than their own labor, which doesn't cost, and they can expect in the long term a fair income by selling off the trees they grow. And from Komaza's perspective, it is also a good way to make a business because, as I mentioned, acquiring land and securing the land is very, very hard. Whereas if we partner with farmers and if farmers can provide their land, we do not have to think about this big headache of acquiring the land or buying the land. And that will result in cost-effective wood supply as a business. So by having this partnership in place, we are able to build a successful business and expand quite rapidly. We originally started as an NGO when we were thinking of only creating farmer income. We started a little bit smaller than what it is today. This is the coastal Kenya, and we're operating in an area called Kilifi. And this was when we started. And we expanded in 2018 to this level. So as you can see, the white box represents about 300 kilometer times 50 kilometer strips. And the whole area is covered by Komaza's farmers. And by last year, we already planted about 4,000 hectares, and we have 14,000 farmers partnered. And we just have a great news. We planted about addition to what we had, 1.2 million trees with 6,000 farmers across 1,600 hectares this year. So we converted ourselves after proving our use case of smallholder forestry as an NGO for 10 years. And after the conversion, we made ourselves into a rapidly scaling forestry business. And right now, with these numbers, we are representing about 40% of new forests created in Kenya this year. And this is more in a visual picture of how our forestation project grew over the past 10 years. When we started in 2008 toward 2016, these are rather modest, small, medium-sized NGO work. But as you can see from 2017 and now, we are growing much faster than it used to be. This is because we are now getting traction from commercial investors who are investing in Komaza as a venture company instead of being an NGO receiving set amount of grant every year. And I'd like to explain how exactly this happened. So, of course, we have to build an infrastructure that is allowing us to grow this fast. So we invest in team, we invest in system, everything and every single step that is required for farmer enrollment team that we have about 300 staff members in the field, hired locally. Their training program is written down into every single pieces of these trainings. And we also have our own proprietary phone app based on Android, which every single field staff use to monitor and manage the farms that we have. And we also built leadership team. So as you can see, in 2005, when we started as NGO, we had a founder standing and running around the farms. Today, we have more than 10 great experienced professionals across East Africa, across professional backgrounds, across value chain. So we are now gearing ourselves toward building a big company. And I like to switch myself into more finance topic, because this is the topic of discussion today. Komaza is standing in a unique position right now. Komaza is standing in between the buzzword of impact investing space, also timberland investment space, and also a climate change related investment space. I'm sure these numbers would overlap, but we are not talking about hundreds of millions. Actually, it's hundreds of billions of dollars investor horizon. So as an asset class, we like to tap into every single possible opportunity. That is our general strategy. And by far, our fundraising has been quite successful. We started with grants, and we changed into convertibles, and we did a Series A, and we are raising about almost $20 million in total right now. And finally, we are now preparing ourselves for a Series B that is coming soon. And just conceptually, how we would frame ourselves is as follows. So in fact, our business case was de-risked significantly by the grant for the first 10 years. We can never discuss our business today without thinking about the grant, because grant allowed us to fail a lot and operate in quite flexible manner, although we could not scale that much. But that was a good trade-off for us, especially in the early stage, because in the early stage was all about proof of concept. So the fact that we could plant the trees 10 years ago and we could harvest the trees a few years ago was enough to make ourselves a sustainable business, because the proof of concept took so long, but it was sustained and done already. Investors are feeling comfortable putting a commercial capital. In retrospect, there is another thing that we discovered along this trip. We always thought proof of concept is done by grant, and then the grant's role is ending, or concessional funding will not happen anymore. But actually, we start to see more and more concessional funding become available because of the impact that we can create and because of our ability to mobilize commercial capital. And commercial capital will benefit significantly by getting guarantees by some of the concessional funders or some of the higher risk grant to specific project that is harder for commercial players to justify based on their return expectations. So in fact, we see more and more grant opportunities or concessional capital opportunities specifically tailored to bring in more commercial capital. So actually, it's a T-shaped evolution I see as the company grows. And in fact, the way we think about commercial financing and blended financing is literally about matching the risk return perspective, not only from financial risk return perspective, but also social and climate risk return perspective. So equity investors for Komaza stands mostly, they want high risk, high return for financial and social and climate return. Because if Komaza can be successful at scale, that means that African forestry landscape is going to change a lot, given the fact that the forestry investor investing only less than 1% of their capital into Africa, although Africa, of course, has a much bigger demand and the supply shortage. So they are looking to revolutionize the forestry industry and enjoy the financial return, but also investing in new solution to climate change. And we see a lot of concessional players who are studying the higher social climate risk return perspective, looking for revolutionary impact by bringing in more commercial investors. And we see also some of the people who are interested in impact investing or so-called ESG investing, and yet not so keen on climate risk, so they want to be on the safer side. But for us, really, Komaza has about 4 full-time private equity investment banking professional just to make this right mix and balancing happen. And we are structuring it just like the timberland investment and also a venture company investment. And we're trying to find a way to match the demand in between by making a product called Smallholder Forestry Vehicle, which I'll explain really quickly. So SFV is an SPV financing method that is allowing us to securitize the tree contract, which is basically trees owned by Komaza, so that we can access low-cost capital and long-term financing, while investor can only invest in areas that is only already proven by Komaza, which is planting trees and growing trees. So what it means is planting tree is a very complex business. We have to grow our seedlings and plant the trees and then grow the trees and harvest and process and sales. This is a full value chain of approach. But the growth period itself, if you look at only this part, is a very, very long period with almost a fixed return because tree growth is fixed. And this is a good opportunity for investors to invest because if you look only into the growth period, the risk is controlled. You can already see the trees planted on the ground when they buy it. And they can actually sell it to Komaza. And with some of the concessional capital guaranteeing the sales of the product, they can access a quite de-risked financing instrument and investment opportunity while creating significant risk to the livelihood of farmers, but also climate change impact. And so far, this idea has attracted a lot of investment across players. So we get a lot of supports from climate change investors, forestry investors. We're grateful, and Green Climate Fund has already shortlisted us for a $35 million facility to support this project. And we are talking with CPI Lab program advisors, which is a consortium of climate financing investors, to develop this idea. So we are really trying to engage all these players before launching the fund so that we can get the best ideas and feedback so that we can be more successful. And the pilot fund will create significant livelihood impact, sustainable wood supply, and forestation impact. So I will wrap up really quickly because I'm running out of time, but I'll just end with a very big picture question. So I just want to allude to this because it's such a big impact. So I think by now people are quite comfortable talking about renewables. Renewables alone constitute about $300 billion investment in 2018. And guess what's the ratio of forestry financing in general? And guess what is the forestry financing in Africa in general? The answer is forestry financing is estimated about $2 to $3 billion per year, which is 1% of renewable energy. And Africa is 1% further of it. So 0.01% is what the money going into African forestry. But I think something is wrong about this, because if you think about climate change actions or land restorations, renewable is not the only way to solve it. So we really think there's a chicken or egg issue where new business model and de-risking need to happen, which is on our shoulder to do, but also investors taking extra risk. So we are really trying to work on how we can de-risk a business and how we can bring in more investor in to address this really, really small portion of investment that is going on right now, becoming a new asset class. And I'll just end with this big picture. All these green parts are already forested, and it's really nice place with a lot of rains. But all these gray and other colors areas, these are the areas that Komaza program can actually expand into. So we are really looking into opportunities by de-risking our business model by doing better work at what we do, but also tapping more investors and more financing through blended finance facilities to grow our business by bringing in more capital. Thank you very much for the patience, and thank you very much for your participation today.
Thank you, Tomo. Very interesting. How blended finance is really sort of at the center of all this certainly from a FLR perspective, and the different risks for financial return from different investors, maybe public and private, but how those can be addressed using smallholder farmers as the central point for that. And I just wanted to see from our participants whether we had any questions to clarify anything in Tomo's presentation. I've got the question forum open in case there are any questions. Great. We have a few questions. So one from Paul Chatterton. Thank you very much. To Tomo, what were your first investment propositions or deals that gained the attention of investors? How did you lock in those first investors?
Yeah, thanks for a great question. So I think from our perspective, I think that the real challenge was when we are switching ourselves from NGO into a social enterprise, which is a for-profit business, in 2016, at 10 years after our launch. The transition happened rather slowly, I would say, because we had to de-risk our business, and a lot of social enterprises and projects like this is really high cost, high risk. So we need to prove our point concept by doing it first. That was a critical point. And then need to speak to as many investors as possible, as what I heard what our founder did when he was designing transition. So it is really about getting the risk really clarified, and then some of the risk addressed already, and then bring it to the table of earlier phase investors, and you learn from the dialogues what are the areas you need to address more, and just a continuous iteration of these conversations is the only way to lead to lock in the very first few investors.
Thank you. And further to that, can you give an example of how you did address and reduce that risk? I think certainly from maybe some of the participants might have been coming from an area where they're unsure of how would you de-risk yourself as a social enterprise to gain these investments from larger investors. What would you? Is it sort of is it looking at financing from different areas? Is it getting those grants at the initial stages in order to attract more commercial capital?
Yeah, I think that's also a great question. I think there are three elements that you need to think about when we are raising funds from commercial investors or blended finance investors. The first one is about the operations. So operations, oftentimes when you're operating as a pure social NGO or any more about like impact-oriented activities, the way you define the success is oftentimes about the quality of the service that you're providing, not necessarily the scale. And operation needs to step up from only doing the quality to provide quality service at scale, because that's the return on investment. So that part is the first part. And the second part is financing. So when you are thinking about operation becoming a scale, quality, a big business, then you need to qualify what's the financial implication, because that's the only way for you to ask for the amount that you need. And then finally, it's about defining the investment thesis for your investors. So oftentimes it's up to investors to decide what they are investing in, but it's really hard when you see investor with different interests coming in together. So you have to provide a clear vision of what exactly you're providing for them. Is it about providing a climate impact, and is that what they are investing in for, or is that the commercial vision of the company? So there is a different ratio or different types of investors with different appetites. So we really need to clarify what exactly they are looking for, and we need to respond exactly the way they are looking for. So that communication is the final piece to make it successful.
And would you then have to respond differently to different investors, or is it just presenting this clearer vision for the enterprise as a whole?
Yeah, that's also challenging question. I think it works both. So in the high level, we need to have one or two major themes. From Komaza's end, on the business side, we will be addressing the problem that all the commercial plantation cannot address. So we have a commercial upside. an impact element, we have a strong case for smallholder revenue creation, but also climate resilience and mitigation impact that we are creating. So these are the basis of impact. And then we have to tailor-make our impact story to each and every single investor who are looking for specific impact. So I would go about high level, common theme, but micro level, we need to tailor still.
Thank you. And I think we just have one final question from Mark Sylvester. Is our climate extremes a challenge for investors and for the project as a whole?
Yes, I think that's certainly a challenge or risks for any agriculture or forestry project like ourselves. But I think we are still standing on the right side of the game, because the reason why we picked up trees instead of maize or other common products is because of its climate resilience. So what happens in the field is whenever droughts happen, livestock can die, all other cash crops can die really soon, whereas trees can stand as long as we have enough time spent in the nursery. So that way we survive the severest droughts in Kenyan history in the past 5 years. So although the climate extremes is something that we are really, really keen on, I think the way we picked our products are right in the sense that it's been surviving all these crazy climate conditions in the past years.
Thank you. And another question from Baz Lumen. What are the financial mechanisms used to support the farmers? Are they what's the format? Is it a loan or is it something else? And what are the characteristics, i.e. what are the conditions, and how could the farmers meet them? Are they supported to meet them? And how well do they work?
Yes, I think our farmer relations team is the hallmark of what we do. And the way we work with them is building a partnership on paper, but that's not really the end of the program. We hire 300 staff members across the field, and what they do is literally visiting every farm and knowing them because they're from the community anyways. And then they build a sustainable relationship so that they can monitor the trees closely, but also enforce the practices that we need so that we can protect the natural environment and all these guidelines. So I hope this answers the questions, but I think, in fact, the closer social context, and the context and the ability to engage outside the formal relationship is what we use as a leverage.
Thank you. I hope that answers the questions that have been proposed so far. I mean, hopefully we'll have a few more questions once we have heard from Janelle as well, as people can look at all of the presentations together. Disha, I hope we had a bit more. Thank you very much, Tomo, for your presentation and answering those questions. And hopefully we'll have a little bit more luck with Donal's presentation. So Donal, if you would like to connect and start sharing your screen, please. Fantastic. And hopefully we'll have better sound. The floor's yours. Thank you, Donal. Donal, I think you might have to unmute as well.
Hi, can you hear me right now?
That's much clearer. Thank you very much.
Okay. So I will try to be quick with the presentation and then down to this slides. So I will share your experience about the implementation of the past in the TECA in Cambodia, aiming to highlight some of the financial flow to how the finance can support TECA in Cambodia through the past mechanism. So just a quick introduction of WWF landscape. So we work across the Cambodia in different landscape, Northern Plain, Eastern Plain, Kong province in the coastal area, and the Sap Lakes, where there's a lot of water over there. So in Kong area, we work to conserve royal turtles, one of the key endangered species in the world. And in the Saps, a lot of water bird conservation activity happen. and also northern plain area as well, large different bird species in the area. And of course, I will share you about the calcium wildlife sanctuary, where we implemented a past project for carbon trading scheme under the voluntary carbon market. The calcium wildlife sanctuary is the total area is around 292 hectares of forest land areas. And previously, in terms of the history of the area, it's a sampling logging concession, a Malaysian-based company. So in the 1990s, it's part of the sampling concession. And later on, the Cambodian government stopped logging land, and then WWF started to engage in the conducting of the biodiversity survey in the area in 2000. And we worked with the Forestry Administration, Ministry of Agriculture, starting to put the area into the biodiversity conservation area. And later on, it renamed to the Saymarket Protection Forest to design the project. And later on, it's also changed to Calcima Wildlife Sanctuary managed under the Ministry of Environment. So that's a judicial street in terms of government institution to manage the area. In terms of forest areas, have different type of forest. That's why it's there's a variety of wildlife in the area. So we have hilly evergreen forest, deciduous lowland forest, wetland forest, and river and pools, and also grassland areas. So we have more than 40 blue-bodied vertebrate species in the areas. And also in the area, in Cambodia, the protected area quite different. There's a lot of indigenous people living in the protected area. So we have to work with indigenous people as well who rely on natural resources and believe in their own cultural in the areas. And just a quick sum up of the project areas. So it's located in Mandalay province. We started this project in 2010, and the total area is around 166,000 hectares, involving 20 villages in the areas, mostly indigenous people called now. And we use two standards called Verified Carbon Standard, and another standard is called Climate Community Biodiversity Alliance, which verify our carbon reduction and generate a credit. So we expect that for 60 years of the project cycle, we can reduce greenhouse gas around 58 million tons, equal to 58 million credits as well. So we gone to do two project verification already. From 2010 to 2015, we generate 9.2 million carbon credits per cell, and another verification from 2016 to 2018, we generate 4 million carbon credit as well. So in total, we have around 13 million credit per cell already. In terms of the driver of deforestation in the areas, mostly agro-industrial, mining, power and road infrastructure, illegal timber harvesting, and also land grabbing is a major issue, and poaching of wildlife trade as well. So through our monitoring system, deforestation monitoring is through remote sensing. You can see the different deforestation areas in the area. We track it since 1998 to 2016, the yellow colors, the deforestation in that area, and then 2006 to 2012, and the latest one is 2012 to 2017. So you can see the different where we have that plus project and try to address the drive of deforestation and use the frontier deforestation in the areas. So this is how the deforestation, frontier deforestation go into the site. So what kind of thing that we do in order to address this issue? So we designed the theory of change. It's very complicated, but I will simplify it in this area. So working with the government in terms of legal support and planning, and law enforcement is a key as well, trying to address the ranger deployed to control the forest, removing snare to protect wildlife and have a checkpoint and community control as well to this issue. And another component is alternative livelihood. So we create selling group, non-work product enterprise, and working with ecotourism development, also carbon financing comes from the sale of the plus credit. I will talk more about that. And also we have a community-based natural resource management in terms of land use planning, zonation, and inventory of the resource as well. In terms of monitoring, we use remote sensing and the smart to control the patrol area and also biodiversity modeling and community survey in terms of their impacts. So the law enforcement is mainly we have deployed the ranger, armed forces to join patrol on foot and motorbikes and patrol the forest area, and also involve the local community to do the patrol, which facilitated by different stakeholders in that area, but we monitor by using the smart monitoring tool for that. And then in terms of community livelihood, we do community-based ecotourism, watching climate, dew, fresh waterfall trekking in the area that generates some of the income of the local community. We also work with agricultural support as well, training community how to do better agriculture, and also small-scale infrastructure support in terms of water and sanitation and serving group in the areas. Another thing that we focus is on the tenure rights of the indigenous people. So through the Cambodian land law, we can do land titling process for the indigenous community who live in the area. So we want to do that process to set up communities to agree on the boundary and zoning and recognized by the Cambodian government, and then their access to their tenure rights in the area and recognize their rights in there. In terms of the benefit sharing from the revenue, so when we sell the carbon credit, the money comes from, the revenues come from is called cross-sell, and some of the proportion will go for transaction costs, and the cross revenue will go for the Ministry of Environment at national level, and most of the money will go for the core activity in the area to support conservation activity, community livelihood, and improve their living standard in the area. And we also raise some of the money in some of the revenue from donors as well to support the activity. And this work plan need to be agreed by the ministry and also WSS as a joint agreement. So what community get directly from this benefit? So we go to a lot of consultation, prioritize the needs of the community in terms of how they want to use the money for. So most of the communities request for the support on community developments such as school, clinics, well, pumping waters, and repairing their road to the areas. So these are the activities that community requested from the class. Just a lesson learned from this class implementation. We think that public-private partnership through this carbon is very important, and it can support not only conservation but restoration of the landscape and improve the livelihood of the community as well, and especially support the protected area management. As we know, most of the forest area is located in the protected area in Cambodia. So supporting the protected area management is key for landscape management and restoration. Another lesson learned that we learned is project level is very complicated. A lot of technical concept, implementation, monitoring, and also standard. You have to go through all the verification process and meet all these criteria in order to generate carbon credit. And it's also challenging to communicate that class concept to different stakeholder, government, community as well. And another issue that we learned is economic factor in terms of project success is policy. We need to get support from the government, market as well, voluntary carbon market, the carbon price low, sometimes really hard to find a buyer, etc. And economic also driving the pressure on the forest area in the nation as well. And so that's why we have to address these kind of challenges. I think that's all for me. This presentation is very short presentation. We have an additional presentation just to let you know.
That's great. Thank you very much, Donal. I'm glad we could connect to finally to see what's a very interesting project. I think we've managed to have a good spectrum of different approaches to restoring land, reforestation, and improving production and value chain access. I think from the certainly from this project here in Cambodia, looking at how to, certainly with a biodiversity focus, how that can be financed, but also how to support the communities on the ground as well. I just wanted to open up the chat to see if there were any questions specific for Donal's project before we go on to a broader discussion, if we have time, for an overall questions for the themes that are cross-cutting between all of these presenters. That's great. Donal, I wondered if we do have a question, if you could just put your video on so that you can answer this one. So from Loxi Sabanda, can you tell us a little bit more about the public-private partnership structuring for the project, please?
So mainly WWF is a organization based in the US. We have our headquarters in New York. So we have the connection with different corporate and company in the US to purchase a carbon credit. So we managed to build a trust between the private sectors and NGO, non-profit organization, and dealing it with the Cambodian government. We are trust into that. So in 2006, we secured a deal for $2.6 million for the carbon credit. And from 2016 to 2018, we secured another $2 million upsell to different companies in the US and Europe as well. So in total for projects, kind of, carbon dioxide, we generated around $3.4 million from the carbon cell. And it's very important to my experience for the trust implementation. You need to build the trust for the company and the corporate, because sometimes when you are a carbon developer, they think that you are a private company try to, taking profit from this kind of business. But for the users, our approach is different. We are non-profit, so most of the money, most of the resources that we raise from the carbon cell, we channel it back to the community through the site management, the area management, and conservation works.
Thank you, Donal. I hope that answers that question. While we're waiting for any more questions, I do have a question myself. You mentioned that the Cambodian government was supporting the implementation of the project with some policy support. Can you explain that a little bit more? What were the type of policies? Were they created specifically or adapted specifically to support the project, or has the project been able to benefit from some of the policies that have been developed in Cambodia?
So actually, this RED Plus project is part of the demonstration project under the RED Plus roadmap that Cambodian government submitted under the UN program. And later on, they developed the national RED Plus strategy, which last year they endorsed that RED Plus strategy already. And Cambodia is moving forward with the RED Plus program for all the protected areas in Cambodia, and they would like to claim the result-based payment under the UN FCCC. So right now, Cambodian government is supporting because they see RED Plus as one way of financing the protected area in Cambodia.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies. And also as well with regards to how, who is within the PPP, who and how is ensuring that the RED standards are continuously met? How is the monitoring conducted? Who is conducting that? And how are you supporting communities to maintain adherence to these, to meet these standards?
So the verification process under these two international standards is very robust. So WWF is a technical partner for the Cambodian government, especially the Ministry of Environment. So we oversight all the project implementation, ensure that we apply with the safeguard, social environmental safeguard under the standard, and also carbon accounting aspect. Also, the WWF is working to support the Cambodian government on this aspect. So all the technical process and work is done by the WWF Cambodia, and the rest of the deal and everything will be with the Cambodian government through WWF as well.
Thank you. We have an additional question from Paul Tatterton, who says, I've had the privilege to visit this project and it really is an exemplary project. And his question is, how can carbon finance be used to incentivize the private sector businesses within the landscape who could magnify the forest protection and the sustainable production? And so therefore, how can we blend carbon and private finance?
I think the carbon finance is just one part. Selling of the carbon credit offsetting is just one part of the story. Another story is talking about the conservation, of the forest, of the protecting up the wildlife, and how the benefit can be channeled to the local community on the ground. That's the key component that buyers are looking for from our experience and negotiation process with the private sector. And some of the buyers, they don't want their name to be listed in the project as well, because they think that if it and they want to offset it, they don't want to reveal their name as well. It comes to that kind of buyer sometimes as well.
Thank you. I just want to see if we have any further questions specific to your presentation. I also thank you very much, Donnell. That was very clear, and thank you for answering those questions. Just wanted to open the floor to ask if there are any more questions to all of our speakers today, having heard all three presentations, to if there are any further questions about the different lessons learned from their implementation of their particular projects, about the different types of finance that we use perhaps for different activities on the ground, how these different financial instruments are coordinated within the landscape, and whether what key challenges, I think that's a question certainly I would like to present maybe to all three speakers, if I may, that what were key challenges that each of your projects faced in the process to either access finance, but also to implement the FLR approach, the forest restoration or improved production within the landscape, and how were these issues addressed? I think it's the process to obtain this finance to support FLR probably hasn't been a straight line. So if Jody, Tomo, or Donnell, if you can have anything to contribute about any challenges that were faced within these projects to access finance and implement activities on the ground, that would be great.
Sure, maybe I can start.
No, that'd be great. Thank you, Tomo.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is always, there are many challenges that I would love to share, but I will just focus on, I think, the biggest one, which is, I think, to make a case for investment itself is a very challenging thing every time we do, especially because I think carbon financing is already established to some extent. Solar panel financing is established to some extent. Microfinance is very established. There are established categories of investment people make already. But often case reforestation projects or forestry related project other than the plain plantation project is a very new topic for all the investors. And oftentimes it falls in between venture project and more established project. And therefore, neither the traditional investors nor the venture investors are interested. So the biggest challenge we face is actually defining what exactly it means to invest in a project like ourselves. So we call it a defining asset class, but that process is, I think, by far the longest and the hardest one. And once we make that case to some investors, these investors feel more comfortable investing in more into the project or similar projects. So I think that kind of industry creation process is the hardest one. We see it.
That's great. Thank you, Tom. And is that linked back to, I know that you spoke earlier that it's important to identify and have this clear vision of presenting to investors. So would you say that also helps to define, I suppose, this asset class that you talk about, that if you have this clearer vision, then investors are more comfortable in investing in restoration projects?
Yes, and I think I'll just further add that it's an identity confirmation process for ourselves as an enterprise, but also for investors themselves. So we have to guide investors to confirm their identity that is suited to invest in Komaza in some ways, because they are always looking for new opportunities, but they are not really sure how they can be part of that by investing.
Thank you. And Donnell and Jody, do you have anything more to add to that?
My cat's with me now. He's come to tell me it's bedtime. So we're obviously not forests. We're agriculture, and I'll talk from the perspective of TECA Community rather than TECA Investment. TECA Community has a lot more water under the bridge. I think one of the really big issues that we've faced is that in the Pacific we are quite remote and we are far away from everything, and I've really noticed this when I've gone to ACP, so Africa, Caribbean, Pacific meetings and conferences. We're very, very behind, and what we've really had to do is we've had to prove that these businesses can work. So for us, we've really had to kind of beg, borrow and steal to actually get the support for these businesses. So TECA actually in its early days, it specialized in compliance. So we actually would do our work with corporate, we'd do corporate work, and then we would have a certain number of pro bono hours allocated, and those pro bono hours would go towards working with the community businesses. And we're now when we've now proven those businesses, so we're now moving those into the next stage. They are now valid revenue generating businesses, and it's very similar to what Tomo presented regarding having the grant financing to start with, and then moving into a blended, and that's the model that we're following for those communities.
That's great, thank you, Jodie. And Donal, do you have anything further? So I do have some throughout the presentations. I've been summing up some of the key lessons from each of these case studies. So if there are no further questions, I think I would just like Disha to give us a little bit further information about the Landscape Finance Lab, and returning back to draw people to the LinkedIn group. Disha?
Thanks, Lucy. Thanks everyone for sticking with us for almost 2 hours, and I think the presentations have been very interesting, and these are conversations that we'd love to continue in the LinkedIn group. We'll add the link again below. But the Landscape Finance Lab is just a very quick intro. We are an incubator that supports landscape teams that are interested in taking their initiative from the early stages, from the concept stage all the way up into development and getting funding and financing. So we welcome all of you. Some of you may know us already and have worked with us, to join us on the Landscape Finance Lab platform, where we can show you the 4-stage structured process that we take teams through. But at the same time, you are welcome to also submit your landscape programs as a way of showcasing the work that you're doing, and we're happy to share this information through case studies as well, through our blogs, through newsletters, and webinars like these when we're collaborating with partners such as Lucy and the FAO. So we do welcome you to collaborate with us, and please do get in touch if you'd like more information, and we'll share this in the LinkedIn group too. We've got quite a few materials that we can share.
Great, thank you, Disha. And I'd also just like to thank all of the presenters. I'm going to share some slides of the key lessons learned and summing up message. If I've missed some things out, then do let me know and jump in. There was a lot to take in with some really interesting presentations, so thank you very much for that. So let me just share my screen. Here we are. Okay, so I think from all three presentations, we've seen the importance to engage with smallholders communities, and in particular to make sure that they are at the centre of any project on the ground, so that there is support of how to make their engagement worthwhile, and also to identify how these benefits can reach communities, how supporting them through finance or non-financial incentives can enable their engagement and make it a sustainable engagement, so that these activities on the ground are worthwhile to them and productive in the long run. So when also, I think I took this from Jodie's presentation, when looking to support these smallholders, to look at the potential to upscale markets that are linking them along the value chain before starting a project. I think that's really key. Maybe any of the impact of climate extremes and other challenges, so that any markets that are developed with sustainable production through forestry, agroforestry or agriculture have a market and have a demand as well. I think key throughout all of these three presentations as well was, and a key challenge in financing any FLR project on the ground, is the importance of how to overcome investment risk throughout the whole process. When a landscape is highly degraded, the risk is obviously going to be much higher, and investors are going to be much more nervous to invest. So the role of identifying and finding different financial capital through the different stages is very important. And then that links us to what Tomo also discussed as well, that the established categories of investment that would normally be sought don't often include things like reforestation, which is new for investors. And this category can also fall between more established projects. So we have to work out one of the challenges that seems to be across these case studies is how to guide investors and how to define the asset class. That it's maybe a long process, but how then can you present a clear vision to investors to support the projects on the ground. And therefore this need for this idea of blending finance from different types of investors at different stages of FLR therefore never diminishes this continued process, depending on their financial risk return and social climate risk return limits. And so therefore it's important to identify how to de-risk this investment into the project, for example, using maybe perhaps more public funding through grants, and then how then this de-risking can bring in more investors along at the later stage, for example, through commercial capital. And also to identify whether there are some costs that are difficult to finance through donor grants, how different funds can be used to support that. I think that was through Donal's presentation. I don't know if any of the presenters have anything further to add to sum up. If not, yes, to the question from Baz, more information on these cases will be available through the lab and also through the LinkedIn group as well. We welcome anybody who has any further questions or would like to start a discussion or share their own experience with their own case study, to please do engage with that. We're very interested to learn a lot more. We will be having a second webinar next week on Thursday at 4 p.m. CET time, and that will be sharing case studies from Africa and Latin America. Wednesday. Just been told Wednesday, not Thursday. So do please join us for that, and we welcome any further questions and engagement with us for that. But I would very much like to thank Jodie, Donal and Tomo for your contributions and great presentations. They're very interesting. And Disha for your tech support as well, and all of you who've provided questions and set me up. So thank you very much, and hopefully look forward to some of you joining us on the webinar next week.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Brilliant.
Bye.
Thanks all. Take care. Bye.